This is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Leamon and Jay, and today we will be talking about the various cultures and aspects of life in Tharkold. Before we get into the episode, we do want to encourage you to write us at torgdcd@gmail.com, and we will read your email, we'll answer any questions, we'll comment on your comments, etc. But we don't have any emails today, so we're just going to jump in and see how far we can go about Tharkold. So the first thing we want to do is Tharkold is one of those realms that has a couple of different races or species in there that are very different. There are humans from Russia, native Russia. There is also the race, which are humans from the Tharkold uh, homeworld that have uh, been changed a bit, as well as the Tharkoldu themselves, which are very different than how they were represented in classic Torg. So let's go ahead and jump in with the big demon techno demons themselves, the Tharkoldu. So Jay, what are your thoughts on the Tharkoldu and their culture and how that affects Torg Eternity?
I actually like the way that the Tharkoldu are actually demons in Torg Eternity. In classic Torg, they were just sort of like a species who were demonic-ish, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it really, there was kind of like Ravagons and Tharkoldu, it's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
why do we have both of these? So I like the fact that these are actually demons, and the fact that they're techno demons to their core makes them different than the
Mm-hmm.
demons in the Cyber Papacy and Isle or sure Core Earth or wherever, right? Uh, so interesting things that I find about them, and was reminded rereading through the book, is that they are summoned. They do still come from, I guess, a hell, which is not necessarily the same as the Cur, but the Cur torment grid is sort of a reflection of that.
Mm-hmm.
So as demons, they are summoned. Back in ancient days, they were summoned by the predecessors of the race, and they were used as sort of cannon fodder, proxies in their wars, until eventually the Tharkoldu overtook their masters and flipped the script. So that's one of the things to remember, is that the vast majority of Tharkoldu, they are supernaturally evil. They are evil entities that were created from the evils of humanity. Except there have been a few recently, the Aspirants, that are trying to turn things around after being exposed to Core Earth and the Law of Hope. So there's this whole new side. But the regular Tharkoldu, for the most part, are lazy, violent, and just filled with hatred. That is the sort of number one thing that all Tharkoldu have, is hatred. They hate you, they hate themselves, they hate everything. They wear tattered clothes because they don't care about looking good, unless they're specifically under some kind of purpose. They will spite themselves just to cause terror amongst other people. And they are, of course, obsessed with dominance, and that's part of the law of dominance in Tharkold. Everyone is either a dominant or a subservient, and every Tharkoldu dreams of being a prince. Okay, maybe a duke. Well, maybe an alpha. Okay, at least I'm not a thrall, right?
Right.
So they will always be trying to work their way up, but they will take everything out on those underneath them as well. So when you encounter Tharkoldu in the game, they're a pretty big bombastic villain, and their stats are, for an alpha group, a single Tharkoldu is manageable. It's kind of like an end boss for a
Mm-hmm.
Delphi mission kind of adventure. But once you start encountering a few of them at once, like a flight of Tharkoldu can really wreck you. So it is possible to not trick them, although if memory serves, their trick's not so hot. But you can play them against each other, like, because they are lazy, but I have seen many game masters mistake lazy for stupid. So
Right.
just remember the Tharkoldu are smart. Like they're hacker Tharkoldu. Like their Kranod was like a VCAD engineer. Like so they use computers, they build the occult tech, they know how it works. They just don't want to do it half the time. So
Mm-hmm.
they send their thralls out to do things not because they can't do it, but because they want to do it. So if they do need to do something, player characters can find suddenly that these Tharkoldu are surprisingly competent at it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's sort of the big thing, and it kind of affects everything that you encounter in Tharkold. Is this even if there's no Tharkoldu present, it's the threat of the Tharkoldu is pretty much everywhere. Even if you don't see them, they could be around. They could just fly down from the sky and show up. So any of the thralls or even Russian citizens in the occupied areas, uh, it the dominance is kind of like even if they're not there, it affects them. They're afraid. They don't want to go against any of the governments or anything like that. No one wants to rock the boat because of the threat of the Tharkolder, and I find that's sort of one of the most important things to get the sort of feel of Tharkold with your characters. It's kind of a mixture between the cyber papacy and Ororsh. There is a horror to it, and there's a paranoia to it, but you can skirt under the radar. But yeah, it's that knowledge that they're out there and they could get you. I find is pretty important.
Right, as well as if you're a mage, Tharkold don't like
Right.
that because that means a human is doing things that they feel should be a area for Tharkold do the techno demons themselves and not others. Um, so similar to the, as you said, the cyber papacy, just the demons that on a mishap you might summon a demon. In Tharkold, on a mishap, you might notify a Tharkold within, I believe it's a kilometer, if there's any
Hmm.
around, that hey, there's some untharkoldu magic being done that might want to go check it out or send your thrall. I mean, the rule is the Tharkoldu would go, but as you said, they might send some thralls or something to check it out because they are lazy. I completely agree with lazy doesn't mean stupid.
Hmm.
And it doesn't also just mean that they're not strong or prowess and fighting and stuff because they will, if need to, stand up and rip somebody apart.
Right. Yeah.
Also, the what I deem the dominance chain is extremely important. It's not just a one dominant over all these other that are kind of equals. No, they have made a pecking order of every single rung on that ladder or every single link in that dominance chain. If someone above you dies, either somebody's going to replace them or you're going to replace them, and maybe you have a fight to replace them, even if it's not the head guy, the guy above, directly above you. So there's various aspects of that. Also, with Tharkold, if Tharkoldu, if they see one of their leaders, their alphas or dukes or princes or whatever, start getting weak, then they will start plotting to take out that person, even if they would want to take that person's spot, but they would have to be able to hold
Yeah.
that spot. So if nothing else, they could get just another rung higher. If say a alpha was hurt and one of the lower ones saw that, at least killing, stabbing that alpha in the back might get somebody above them, and then they could maybe move up a peg at some point. So that's something to always think of. Intimidation is very big. That's a also it doesn't have to always be physical to the
Yeah.
death. It can
That's the
be
big thing I see a lot of
intimidation.
people mess up on, or, because the whole dominance chain exists to prevent fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's all about intimidation and getting someone to do something without a fight because they don't
Right.
want to actually fight, because part of the whole being lazy, it's also they're kind of cowards, and in a way they want to be able to dish it out to people, but they don't want to have to take it. So
Hmm.
if they can intimidate you and just show that they're bigger and stronger and take stuff, that is so much better than actually having to fight all the time. But then, like you said, sometimes it does happen.
Hmm. And also the more people you've intimidated to
Hmm.
be subservient to you, that's the more thralls you have, the bigger your status is because you are over a bunch of people. So we do encourage game masters and players to not just think, oh, it always means death, it always means this.
Hmm.
Intimidation is extremely important, and that dominance chain is to have an actual chain or a ladder. It's not just to be only a one link on that, be an island.
It is one of those things that players can sometimes chafe at, kind of like in the Nile Empire when you're not supposed to kill villains.
Right.
Let them go because that's what you do. You send them to jail. Just like in Tharkold, if you are defeated in a dominance challenge, you should acquiesce and do what they
Hmm.
say, not just kill them. So it's kind of one of those things where the more you get into the RP of the reality, the better everything kind of feels.
Right. And one of the things that I liked when you said, possibly trick them, I could
Hmm.
see getting into a point where somebody, one of a couple of Tharkoldu show up, and you kind of trick them as a, okay, I'll
Yeah.
show, I'll bend the knee to you, not to you, and to get them to,
Exactly.
fight or something, and then maybe slip off while they're duking it out. So you had mentioned the aspirants, so let's talk a little bit about aspirants. Aspirants were, as you said, specifically because of uh, Tharkold's interaction with Core Earth. Core Earth has all these possibilities. They have this law of hope, and unlike most other invasions of different cosms, that a new cosm, a new reality comes in and just takes over or defeats the other one. This time, Core Earth has so many possibilities it's actually affecting the cosms.
Hmm.
And there's also a minor world law of the law of conservation of evil, which kind of states there's uh, e- evil ha- evil has to be conserved. So if there's only a certain amount of evil, and there's more evil beings, then they're like less evil. And if there's fewer evil beings, then they're more evil. So,
Right.
but also the demons and stuff, they do come from a hell being demons, but they also can be created through evil deeds. So as the Tharkold reality hit core Earth, and people start having this really mean, aggressive, law of ferocity type thing happening, and doing evil deeds, you create a bunch of new demons as well, affected by the law of conservation of evil. They're not quite as evil, the new ones, and then the law of hope coming in, and then you have some techno demons, some Tharkoldu, who, while they're still evil, they're still considered supernatural evil. They don't just wake up one day and are like
Hmm.
goody goody and Mr. Rogers or Bob Ross or something like that. They come into being, but they start questioning the whole. Is this always a good thing? And some of them get to a point where they at least will try not to be evil and not necessarily try to be good. Those become Storm Knights, but some of the aspirants might just try not to be so evil. So, what are your thoughts on the aspirants?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not even just the law of hope, but also the minor world law, the law of imagination as well,
Hmm.
because a lot of the other invading realms are very, like, there's not really fiction per se in
Right.
them. Like, they don't imagine all of this other stuff like we do in Core Earth. So the techno demons come to Core Earth and they start seeing all of these other, like, forgive the word, possibilities that
Hmm.
they could do. There's like all these all this fiction about demons, and also don't forget they're also being now exposed potentially to spirituality for the first
Mm-hmm.
time too. There's no religion back on Tharkold. Again, a change from classic, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no religion at all. And so now the invaded areas of Russia, Poland, Ukraine, everywhere, the survivors there, they still have their religion, and even though the spirit axiom has gone down, they still do it. And if Tharkoldu go elsewhere, they could see some crazy stuff, especially with Isle and the Cyber Papacy both right there beside them. So that's something else that can fuel them. And so these aspirants kind of they're, as you said, they're kind of born not as evil necessarily, and they see that there's this maybe another way. They maybe get disenfranchised because of the dominance chain. Like they tend to be smaller,
Mm-hmm.
and then, so if they transcend to become an aspirant, they do physically get smaller. They lose a lot of the perks of being Tharkoldu. I mean, partially for game balance for
Mm-hmm.
PCs, of course, but also it fits, right? They're not being like supercharged with evil anymore, and
Mm-hmm.
they have to kind of find their own way. I liken them kind of like, always think of it as like Angel from Buffy the Vampire Slayer
Right.
or stuff like that. I mean, half the time it's always vampires, but they are still an evil creature. They still get burned by the sun. Okay, they don't, but I'm talking about vampires here. You still have all your weaknesses, and you always have to act not to do the first thing that comes to your mind, which might be just to rip someone's throat out. Something, it's like, no, I can be better.
Mm-hmm.
So in the short term, you lose a lot of power, but especially if they're a PC, in the long term, it can go somewhere very different. And because the aspirants are totally new to Torg Eternity, I have no idea where this is going either. So it could lead to a very interesting place. Of course, the problem you do have is, sure, there's these aspirants that are the good techno demons, but I'm sure that members of the race probably don't really see the distinction
Right.
for the most part. It's just a techno demon is a techno demon. We should kill it, and that's it. But
Especially after thousands of years of being, under
yeah, under
foot
demonic rule.
rule.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with all those points. I think the aspirants are pretty cool. It's a nice balance from allowing a Tharkoldu to be a player character. In classic Torg, they had to give up so many possibilities per adventure to retain their power, but they started off very, very powerful compared to other player uh,
Mhm.
characters.
Well, everything in the Tharkold book, but
Yeah,
in
everything
that,
in classic was Tharkold was the why would you ever be cyber
yeah.
people anything, but also there are perks and stuff that can allow an aspirant to kind of regain some of that power, whether that's they can fully fly instead of just gliding, or they get chains, or they become bigger, etc. There are various ways that they can um, kind of regain that power through doing good instead of
Mhm.
doing evil. Um, when you're talking about the law of imagination and books and fiction and stuff, I was just thinking of an aspirant like plugging in an audio book of some romance novel where there's like a human and a demon, or something, or watch the Hallmark Channel
Yeah, I
and
mean, I'm sure there's all kinds of animes they could
that they
watch about this.
right and be like, oh, that's interesting. And that again, do be aware that the aspirants are supernatural evil. So when you have your priest that does those things like ward enemy, that's going to negatively affect your aspirant and not help them, or anything else that have an effect against the
Unless you're an evil
supernatural.
priest.
Is gonna anything that would normally affect a supernatural evil would affect them, and instead of having a base hand size of 4, they have a
Mm-hmm.
base hand size of 3, which knee jerk reaction to me is, oh, it's not that bad. But playing it, I really missed that fourth card.
Yeah.
It's really nice to have.
I will say in classic Torg, I was always like, I hate the fact that they let Tharkoldu be player characters.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was like the dumbest idea. And then for Torg Eternity, I was like, there's no way I'm gonna let players be a Tharkoldu. They're just too powerful. But the way that it was done with the aspirants, I think works very well.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. So let's then switch to the other peoples of the Tharkoldu homeworld, the race, and the division between the free and the thralls. So, what are your thoughts on the race?
And so I think if you make a race character, you need to choose right away. Like, were you part of the free or were you a thrall? So you're going to have a very kind of different attitude, I think, depending.
Mm-hmm.
Because although many of the thralls still uh, go with the way of the free, it's probably not as ingrained in them, I would say. So basically, the way of the free kind of takes advantage of the social 25 axiom. There's no different cultures among the
Mm-hmm.
race. It's just we are one race. And the way of the free is that we will help each other. We will show love to each other. We will not betray each other. For the demons and things like that, it's all about the strength of community. And so that's what the people outside of the slave pens basically
Mm-hmm.
have to do to live. And they're still not exactly, living the high life out there in the wastelands of
Right.
Tharkold. Remember, their planet was completely devastated by the pandasmic warheads. It's basically, I mean, everyone likens it to it. So, yeah, we know it's like the beginning of Terminator
Mm-hmm.
out there, right? Um, so they're not living the best life, but they are getting by, right? And every once in a while, someone from the free is able to kind of sneak into the slave pens or get captured, and they could spread their word there. But on the other hand, if you are a thrall, then you grow up in the breeding pits. You're given to a like foster family of people who are otherwise too old or infirm to do anything else but raise you. They may or may not care for you, but eventually you're just ripped away from that foster family and then sent to work. And I guess they'll get in a do some tests to figure out what you're good at. And if you're good at something, you'll get sent there and work that job for the rest of your life. Otherwise, you're going to be sent to the gladiator fights and just to fight for the demon's amusement. And it's not exactly what you would call a good life. And but in that, uh, then you will probably be sold or given to a specific demon, and you will be their thrall, and they will send you off to do things. And for most thrall player characters, ex-thrall player characters,
Mm-hmm.
that would mean that you were brought to core Earth and you were basically used as cannon fodder at the beginning. You may have been sent as preliminary invasion, like to set up the stelae. But I would imagine normally I would think those would only be the most broken characters. Like the demons would have to have totally intimidated you and indoctrinated you to trust you with something like that.
Right.
But I could still see players wanting that to be their backstory. So there's all kinds of psychic shenanigans that could break that, I suppose. But otherwise, yeah, most were just sort of meat shields that were brought in. And you get a lot of these thralls that escaped because of transformation of their slave collars, which no longer functioned, and they just book it. And
Right.
then some thralls will have their moment of crisis and they'll make a choice and they'll see what's going on Core Earth and want to fight back against the demons and want to help people. They'll follow the teachings of the way of the free that maybe they were taught by in secret, quietly at night in the pens, or even in a psychic like mind palace, something like that. But then there's also those who, when they break free, they just want revenge and they just want to kill and destroy and become raiders and marauders and just like live like kings and bring suffering to other people as if they were Tharkoldu. So
Hmm.
those are usually not supposed to be your player characters, but hey, it's it's your game, whatever you're doing.
So yeah, I would agree. Having that community aspect for the free is extremely important. That they realize the only way to survive, similar to the Terminator Resistance, is to work together, to always help each other, to not let petty squabbles, and really do work with that social 25 to for the benefit which the Tharkol do not do. And again, they are all mixed. They don't have various cultures and stuff. They just kind of, it's a big melting pot blender type thing. The thralls, the ex thralls, though, whether it is a NPC or a PC, you have to determine what are your thoughts and what are your reactions to the Tharkoldu. Where a free person is never going to want to be a thrall. They probably really understand the live free or die motto. Um, but a thrall might have it ingrained in them so much that as soon as the Tharkoldu appears, they go back to that groveling thing because that's
Mm-hmm.
what kept them alive for so long. Where the free race would not have that. So kind of also think about that. Um, Also, the race is separate than the Russians in
Mm-hmm.
Tharkold. So while they are human or near human, they have their own perk category. They can't get human perks; they can only get the race perks. So there's been
Although I think
enough
they have a
difference.
perk that lets them take human perks,
Right.
so it's like a tax.
Yes, yes. So it's close enough, but not exact. Being free, in my view, they also wouldn't necessarily be willing to just say yes to being under Russian rule,
Mm-hmm.
Volkov rule. That they would be like, no, we're free, and that means we do our own thing. We treat each other good, and that we're not subservient to Tharkoldu. We're not going to be subservient to you. So that can cause some conflict, whether that's good or bad, depending on what your Storm Knights are doing at any given time. To think about that, and to me, they would not be taking like Russian passports or Russian names because they're completely different. If they came across the Maelstrom Bridge, it was to hurt the Tharkoldu, to keep them on Core Earth and away from their family and loved ones back on Tharkold, and things like that not necessarily like, say, the elves or dwarves from Isle who are going to help, or even the Victorians of Aurorsh
Yeah,
going to help, as well as fleeing, kind of a mixed thing. They're more of the helping back home, not the we're going to help these
indirectly. Yeah,
Earth people. And again, thralls, you could just come up with a lot of different things depending on what your thrall's background was, how they felt, how they continued to feel. If they are well, I got my freedom, I will never go back, or again, this is the behavior that kept me alive for so many years, and it's just gets, classical conditioning. When the thing happens, you kneel just because that's what's kept
yeah.
you alive, and you've seen so many other people die. So that kind of brings in aspects. And then the thing with the psychic abilities is, for the most part, Tharkol dude hate absolute, as well as hating everything. They absolutely hate psychic powers. They don't have psychic powers. They have magic. They don't allow humans to use magic, and they don't like psionics because that means the humans have
It's
some
like
type,
cheating.
yeah, have something similar in that mystical power type thing. So it's like, no, not we kill you too, because
Hmm.
we don't want you to have anything that even tempts you to think that you're on par with us. And going back with all of that, there's a lot to keep in mind, especially if you're going through the Kraynod has been killed. There's three dukes fighting. You have a Russian leader, you have a Tharkoldu, and you have an ex-thrall. So you have kind of one of each of them that per- present different aspects and are looking at things completely differently in their goal to become the High Lord of Tharkold. So, having said that, let's switch over to the humans of Tharkold. So, either what were Russians or other parts of Tharkold. You have the city dwellers, and you also then have the marauders and scavengers of the wastes
Right.
and those rural areas. Because if you look at a population density map of Russia, you will notice that it's almost all in the part that's been invaded. Um, that is in the European section of Russia, although there are some big cities in the Asian part, they're cities and not areas. So, like the
Right.
third biggest city in Russia currently is Novosibirsk in the middle of Siberia, but it is all the places around it is completely bare, and that has not been taken over. But even in Russia, European Russia,
Well, in
you
fact, I believe in the source book it says that is now the largest city in Russia
yeah. So
after everything that just went down.
right. So all the deaths and stuff in the
Yeah.
Europe, that is now the current largest. But even in the European area of Russia, you have all these cities, and between them are lots of wilderness and just nothing. Or all there's the I want to say there's the comedian who is like, in Soviet Russia, this does to you
Yeah.
type thing. There there's a an actual Russian saying that basically translates as like in in Russia, your country house owns you, because a lot
Mhm.
of time they go off to the countryside and do farming and keep up their little dacha and do things like out there. And even if they're from cities, they might go out to help grandma and stuff work with the gardens and stuff during the summertime. All of that was not vastly populated, has been
Right.
completely overrun now. So let's first talk about the blasted lands and the scavengers and stuff like that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, the blasted lands is like what you were just talking about, but more so, right?
Right.
Because like in the standard Tharkold areas, it's kind of like the cyber papacy where there's like the big sprawls and
Hmm.
then nothing, right?
Right.
And then in just Tharkold normal, there's plenty of weird creatures that were created during the Great War against the race, like the Flensers,
Hmm.
um, the I'm blanking on names, but all kinds of these like ghouls, of
The
course,
ghouls, the horgons.
Horgons, yeah, like all this crazy stuff. And so those things are just sort of roaming around the countryside, either roaming or let loose. No one, can't tell. But then you've got the blasted lands, which is even worse because when the Maelstrom Bridge was detonated by the nuke, the Maelstrom Bridge itself is an occultech kind of amalgam made with the nanotech. And when the blast just sent shards of this
Hmm.
bridge all into this area, it did create the whole blasted lands themselves, like this. I guess it's like a giant soft point essentially, like
Right.
or like billions of soft points essentially. But even worse than that, this occultech seeped into everything and all manner of creatures, and it transformed normal core earth animals into abominations. So now you've
Mhm.
got these wolves and bears and everything, whatever classic Russian tropes you want to have, but
Right.
animals just like with spikes and like laser eyes now, like all kinds of mutations. And that's the other big thing, mutations amongst the all the humans as well. So
Mhm.
you have people like sprouting additional arms, all kinds of stuff. So you have these displaced people. So the invasion starts, right? The
Mhm.
transformation, the axiom wash happens. People are like, what the hell? There's a then a nuke goes off and the entire area is just shredded with occultech shards and destroys almost everything in the area. So
Mhm.
now people have been reduced to traveling, like just trying to survive here. And then if they even make it out of the blasted lands, they come into Russia. It's either they're going to get scooped up by techno demons and like put in the Igri as some
Mhm.
kind of attraction, or like the government and the people are gonna hunt them down because Volkov is putting out propaganda against psionics and mutations and all these things. So they don't really have anywhere to go. If they try to go into Isle or cyber papacy, they'll just get shredded by the reality storms. So they kind of have nowhere to go um, except the blasted lands themselves. And you start forming these large sort of raider groups, and power gets more and more consolidated, especially when Thracian moves up into that area as well. So you have
Right.
cities in there that are controlled either like they're considered to either be Tharkoldu or Russian.
Mhm.
So he comes by, he says, "You work for me now. I'll let you live." And if they say okay, they still function as Russians, right?
Mhm.
Otherwise, if they resist, he smashes them. They put a techno demon in charge. It's run like Tharkold, which is generally worse for everybody. But
Right.
it's worth noting that even the ones that are Russian are still not like normal core Earth Russia.
Mhm.
It's the dominance chain. It's a lot more Mad Max kind of style. And then you have all the scavengers, which you mentioned, because of all this occult tech. There's all kinds of crazy powerful stuff out there. So you've got people driving around looking for treasure that
Mhm.
they can sell or fuse into their own bodies if they're crazy enough, right? So the Blasted Lands is a very desperate area. People want to get out of there, but they don't really have anywhere to go. The Delphi Council can maybe help them, but they can only help so many people at once. There's also just like treasure hunters and all manner of crazed Borderlands style pain cultists and things running around there. So it's a pretty wild area, and I kind of see why it tends to get most of the attention. But like, it's not all of Tharkold. There's
Mhm.
still plenty of like just normal Tharkold Russia
Tharkold.
as well.
Yeah, uh, thinking about the blasted land is kind of Mad Max in the snow, or
Hmm.
you know, brings that because that area was mixed, so it had both core Earth and it
Hmm.
was unbound, and I think that was a pretty cool aspect until
Yeah.
Thracian started laying down stele. It was unbound. It wasn't in one of the triangle stele bounded areas, so therefore also the darkness device wasn't sucking up possibilities.
Right.
It was this weird core Earth slash Tharkold reality that you had all this nanotech, this bad nanotechnology, not the I get a cool Iron Man suit, but the
Right.
this thing has gone into me and adding weird stuff to my body that I can't control and possibly driving me crazy. You have the mutants in there, which I believe we talked about when we went through the abomination perks. You have the chain wolves and the abomination bears and things like that. And it's also still very much I kind of like see it as the Mad Max and Terminator kind of melding in the blasted lands, and you have all these creatures and nasty things out there,
But there's still that occult part as
and
well,
the occult
because like
part,
the
right?
the chain wolves are still summoning like they're demonically summoned chains
Right, like
that
the
infect
Tharkoldu
them, right?
chains.
Yeah,
So you get kind of a little Hellraiser twist
yeah.
in there. So it's a
It's the cherry
pretty
on top.
nasty area, and they're doing it, to survive. It started off being a survival thing, and then it becomes a to survive we have to beat up our neighbors because
Mm.
we have limited resources and stuff. And then you have, like you said, Thrachin swooping down and saying serve me or serve me.
Yeah.
And that. So then let's move on to the civil, quote unquote, civilized areas of Tharkold, Russia, and that. You had talked about the igri, which is the Russian word for games, and it's very much in a kind of Running Man
Yeah.
style thing where you have contestants that are let loose and then they get hunted, and if they can get to the end, they supposedly are able to earn their freedom. Whether or not that is true, you know,
Who knows?
and people turn that on, just like how in the, I guess I think it was the 80s where they had American Gladiators, and then they have like the American Ninja and all the little obstacle
Yeah.
course type things going on, except for it's gladiatorial-ish, or setting
To the
people
death.
off and having people chase and try to kill them. And if they survive, get to the end, then they win. So you have that kind of uh, thing going on, and that's in the civilized areas.
Right.
So do you have anything more about the civilized areas?
It's funny. I basically was doing the whole Running Man thing before the
Mm-hmm.
Tharkold book came out,
Uh,
and it mentioned the Igri. I'm like, oh well, okay. I guess I'm on the right page here, because that's the thing. If you are on the lowest rung of the dominance chain and you're just working a factory job or whatever, and you come home watching some other poor bastard get
yes.
killed is like you kind of having some kind of dominance over them
Mm-hmm.
remotely. So I could see why it would be so like addictive for the regular civilians in Tharkle to watch this. I've often actually really wondered about how life in Tharkold really operates.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really specifically mentioned, but even just the UltraCAD machines, like
Right.
how common are those? My assumption is that basically every household has at least some small, minor UltraCAD
Hmm.
that can make general household items. And maybe they're like, so it kind of almost goes back to like the Soviet, communist
Mm-hmm.
ideals where technically they're almost, not really, but almost in a post, what's the term? Scarcity
Okay.
society.
Right.
Like everybody has a 3D printer that can print anything in
Mm-hmm.
theory, right? As long as you have the bricks for it. And we talked about how between the big cities there's nothing. So in
Mm-hmm.
my mind, there are synth cyclers just trundling through, and these are like the giant machines that break down everything, smash buildings, different components, and dissolve them down into bricks of their component materials. They're just basically fuel for the 3D printers. And I know one of the big things for Jazrael with her expansion is she would just send those through the cities
Right.
and during the mayhem blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be living in a house one day and then suddenly it's being eaten right from under you. So I've used those actually in my games previously where there's people like some freer, like some X thralls that escaped and living in a village, and a synth cycler is just coming to completely wipe it out. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do we stop it? That alerts the demons, the things like that. So there's not an unlimited supply of materials, but there's a lot of materials, and I can see people being rationed, or at least
Mm-hmm.
even paid in these bricks. But there is still money. That was the other big thing, except all of their money is like demon crypto. Uh, right? It's like it's bit mined in hell. in the torment grid. So the fact that everything is either done by barter, like out in the blasted lands, or in the more Tharkold sections, or it's all digital in the Russian Tharkold sections. So
Right.
it's interesting because it's like, okay, so they must have computers,
Mm-hmm.
or do they have cell phones? I would imagine they must have some kind of cell phone. But it's an interesting concept when you think about everything that you are experiencing, from watching the Igri to buying things online, all goes through the torment grid, which means even your money is tainted with
Right.
evil,
With
right?
demonic evil magic
Yeah,
stuff.
it's the most stable currency on Earth right now, but it's evil. So it's another interesting fact. So it's kind of like, I wonder what the day-to-day life for your average Russian citizen really is.
Yeah, that's a good thing for game masters and players to kind of ponder in it. I like thinking that at least Volkov presents to the rest of the world is everything's a-okay. We're living just like we did before the invasion, using that social 25, that, two steps higher than Earth, one step even higher than Pan Pacifica, as propaganda, as a look at the cool things I did as the defender of Earth.
Hmm.
I fought back the invasion. I kept my society going, and that's kind of what he's presenting out there. But there were concessions made when he formally became a duke under Kraynod, and now he's at with the fight with Jezreel and Thracian. It's a I want to become a High Lord, which is associated with
Yeah.
the darkness device choosing me, the darkness devices of this Tharkold reality. I'm going to have to get aboard this Tharkold reality. So there's that very, very different, but kind of the flip side of the cyber papacy facade, what's presented to the world, and then what's behind it. Is the facade is everything's normal. It's not the flashy neon and
Right.
hard light holograms and stuff like that. It's this is core Earth, just like it always was, that I've kept. But in the background, you're drunk in the alley is getting eaten by a synth cycler, and to use, like you said, to make the bricks that then might be making whatever meal that you
Right.
you have your 3D printer thing making your UltraCAD thing produce for you. So you have to kind of think of all this really weird stuff going on. They have the torment grid curve, but you don't just nod into it like the cyber papacy godnet. You give yourself a wound unless you have a jack installed to get into it. So everything is dealt with pain, not necessarily death, because then you stop feeling pain, but things are that give shock, or even more so. So I could see even healing and stuff being oh, my bones have knitted, I'm fine that way, but I have this lingering pain that continues on. So you would have this high tech 25 things to help people not die, but then they're always going to have this pain type lingering effect, which is sinister in it. And that adds to the law of cynicism,
Right.
which affects that glory events are not as effective, because why would they be?
Right.
People over there doing some neat little thing. Oh, that's not going to last. There's that's a moment of niceness, not but that's not how the world operates, type thing. So yeah, this is a pretty interesting mental state to kind of wrap your head around uh, for that.
Also, speaking of concessions that you mentioned earlier, I think one of the more interesting things, which kind of gets into like almost current, Russian situations, but is one of the concessions of when the Tharkoldu, one of Volkov's demands when
Hmm.
he became a duke was that no Russian citizen can become a thrall.
Right.
Right? So if you're a Russian citizen, you're safe from the techno demons, which are here, right? And they're not techno demons; they're Tharkoldu. It's
Right. Yeah.
you need to
You.
be respectful of our new friends. However, if you do something that the state does not agree with, your citizenship can be revoked,
Right.
and then you are fair game. So
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, sure, in the cyber papacy, the toaster is listening and the priests might come for you. But in Tharkold, if someone snitches you out and your name gets taken off the list, a demon could just come smashing through your window in the middle of the night and grab you and fly off with you. And
Right.
no one can do anything about it.
Or you could be gathered up by the police and sent off to the
Yeah.
agree to be a
Yeah.
contestant. Oh look, we got a new contestant because they're not a citizen of Russia. So that's a good point. Then the cyber papacy, you get snitched on and you get burned at the stake.
Yeah.
In Tharkold, you get snitched on, and then you either get sent to the games or become a thrall or something. You lose your citizenship. So it's not like, oh, I was born Russian, I'm fine. It's I
Mhm.
have to continue
Toe the
to
line.
to be Russian. So I'm not going to say bad things against the president. Like you said, it inadvert the way we wrote this pre 2022 has
Yeah.
way too many similarities
Yeah.
to things that we're seeing in the real world, but it was kind of based off of information that we knew that just went further in real life than what we were thinking would actually happen in real life.
Yeah.
But again,
And
I would say if that is a point that you don't want to bring into your game, please change it. If that is something that strikes too close, as with anything in Torg Eternity, just because it's presented doesn't mean you have to put it in your own game. I could see where that could cause various problems. I know when the whole real world thing happened for a week, I was completely. I mean, I've been negatively affected by it the entire time, but that first week was coming after having written a bunch of stuff for Tharkold that went along with that as fiction, and
Mhm.
then it starts becoming fact that kind of messed with me a little bit. So if you need to take a step back or not have it in your game, that is perfectly fine with it.
I guess also there's the continuing with that issue of if you're a citizen, you're fine. That also applies to everybody outside of Tharkol that's still
Mm-hmm.
in Russia, which does mean if you're outside of Tharkol and you're in like Eastern Russia and
Mm-hmm.
you do something that the government doesn't like, you could find yourself on a train going west, right?
Right. Right. Yep.
So the fear is still everywhere. It doesn't have to be necessarily Tharkold. It could just be core Earth Russia as well.
Right. And that is another thing that's a little interesting because most of the other realities are they take control over complete countries
Yeah.
or areas. The United States is a little bit different because you have various aspects that have been taken over by the living land, parts of Canada, Mexico, etc. But it's a very stark difference. There
Mhm.
is the core Earth
Yeah, yeah.
trying to be what we are in modern time, and then absolute primitive jungle with no crossover type thing. Where
Mhm.
in Tharkold, you have the largest country in the world, Russia, where the eastern half is Tharkold. The western half is
Yeah.
Tharkold in Europe. The Eastern Asian section, it's bigger in area but less densely populated, but still has a lot of people. That's core Earth. And then you have Volkov, who is, after Krened's demise, is one of the dukes fighting it out to be High Lord, but also the president of Core Earth Russia. So there's some things to think about that he leg- legit, and I'm doing air quotes
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
he's legitimately the president of Russia and also trying to expand Tharkold. So that's some interesting things to keep in mind. He's not just Tharkold, he's also Russian.
Yeah,
And
it's just why the Delphi Council has so many issues with like what to do with
right,
him.
right, because it's just a unique situation. And like I said, the rest, Pan Pacifica, entire countries have been taken over. China is pretty much just Pan
Mhm.
Pacifica. Japan is just Pan Pacifica,
Yep.
etc.
Korea's.
And those leaders don't really have a say so in
Yeah.
in the reality, whereas in Tharkold, your president of this country has a say so in the reality. That's a little bit different and very different than how it was in
Oh yeah.
classic classic
Significantly.
Torg. The Russians were able to completely repel the invasion, and then the Tharkoldu came back later in Los Angeles. But in Torg Eternity, they only were half successful or
Yeah.
partly successful. So hopefully that gives everybody some food for thought about the Tharkoldu, the Aspirants, the free, both or the race, both the free and the ex uh, thralls,
Thralls.
and then the Russians, the city dwellers versus those out either in the blasted lands or in the wilderness areas, because you do have all these mean, nasty monster type things. You don't have the fun bear jumping in the car and being buddy buddies with the Siberian guy. you,
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
you you have the abomination bear coming out and killing everybody in the village. So the village, a couple of villages get together and have to become scavengers and marauders and stuff. So a lot of good material in there. Again, we do thank you for either watching or listening to us. You can email us at torgdcd@gmail.com, and we will again answer any questions you might have. We'll comment on your comments and etc. So until next time, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. Bye.